Great. We're going to continue with the BPI Theater, and our next presentation is being given by Greg Beatty. He's the corporate vice president at Charles River Laboratories, and his presentation, Insourcing, Outsourcing, and Everything in Between. There are some tough questions, but there are some real answers, and he's going to describe how to make the correct decision for your specific situation. So with that, I'd like to introduce Greg.
Thanks very much. Maybe a question to start with the folks who are sitting here. When you think of Charles River, is there anybody here who associates Charles River with anything other than rodent models? Yeah, Charles River, very well known for selling rats and selling mice. A lot of what we do, global organization, a lot of different product lines and services, including being one of the world's largest outsourcing companies in the biologics testing field. In addition to that, with facilities, I should say, in Europe and in North America, we're also one of the world's largest insourcing companies. We have over 800 employees in the insourcing arena, spread across 70 different contracts around Europe and the States. So, I think that's an important context as you think about, how I'm speaking from our experiences in terms of how we do this across a very broad range of products and services. So maybe start with a very basic definition, but insourcing is not something people necessarily understand. So what is it? Really, it is an alternative to outsourcing, and it's a way to leverage your internal capacities by bringing a provider into your space who can operate testing within your physical locations. And why would you do that? The reasons you would do that really around the business decisions that need to be made around control. So outsourcing, often what will happen is there's a reticence to give up control and not have direct oversight. In an insourced arrangement, you have your subject matter experts on site able to really oversee the quality of what's going on. The two main ways that work gets done outside of a client's resources, if you will, are outsourcing. People look at an outsourced provider as an extension of their organization. The other is, as I said, the insourcing opportunity, where third-party vendors become an attractive option for those people who really want to make sure that they've got control and direct oversight of what's going on. Flexibility and critical visibility and critical processes are the drivers on this one. What are key considerations here? I've got a couple of things here, trying to juxtapose a little bit some of the previous presentations that we had just on outsourcing with insourcing. So on the right here, some of the critical things, if you are outsourcing work, is that you need to be doing quite a bit of vendor audits. You need to make sure that compliance, whatnot, the third party is where they need to be. You need to make sure that you've got very robust processes around all the paperwork and whatnot, transferring of samples. And you may have to deal with commercial license revisions if you're pushing that out to a third party. Those are not things you necessarily have to worry about if you're insourcing, but there are some other areas that really need to be focused on. Those are subject matter expertise. What value does a contractor bring to your operation if you're bringing them into your space? How are they structuring governance to make sure that the client's needs, your client's needs, are being met and are being driven with a common vision? And then there's a corporate culture that's a critical element. If you're hiring contractors and bringing them into your space, how do you make sure that you have longevity on those contractors? They can't feel treated like second-class citizens, if you will, operating within a client facility. Oftentimes when you have contractors on site, they're not able to take advantage of some of the amenities that the company may have. They may not be able to participate in events that occur on site. So how do you make sure that those the contractors on site feel part of a company, they feel well taken care of? Critical element of quality, because that drives retention and that drives essentially the quality of the operation that you're going to get, the quality of the research work being done at your site. Okay. Obvious perhaps, but it needs to start with a thorough understanding of the customer's mission and needs. The provider has to be able to provide fully trained staff. So this is a pretty key differentiator when you look at staffing agencies who can provide bodies, but they can't necessarily provide all the training that's needed, particularly in a regulatory-driven environment. So how is it that you leverage the provider's operations in order to drive that quality? They have to be able to create efficiencies for you. So a lot of what an in-source provider should be able to do is able to surge and reduce capacity as needed to meet your needs. This is often something that a provider can do much more rapidly than a pharmaceutical or a biotech company can do themselves, and it's part of the critical elements of the value proposition that a company like Charles River provides. Because we operate our own GMP testing laboratories around the world, we can bring best practices into the client sites as well. Some of the things that you learn as a CRO is how to do things very, very efficiently so you can be cost competitive. Those are not necessarily, I should say, best practices that we see at many of our client facilities. So when we get in there, we can deploy subject matter experts to help improve efficiencies, thereby reduce headcount to get the work done on site. And that really speaks to accessing the ancillary resources that a company has. You don't get that type of expertise if you're not working with a company that does this themselves. Obviously, communications are key. Flexibility, maintaining standards are key, and what I've already spoken to, maintaining that motivated workforce and how you create that culture so that the vendor's staff on site really feel like they belong are all very, very critical elements. These are driven by having an effective governance structure that exists between the vendor and the client. In very large relationships, you'd be looking at something that extends up to an executive steering committee at a very high level to make sure that the vendor is growing and scaling and diversifying as needed to meet client needs. On a smaller level, the smallest level, you have you're at the lowest level here on this diagram. You've got your QC teams operating. They need to be managed independently. They would be managed by the contractor on site. As those expand, they need to escalate to a functional management team who are really taking a look, a joint governance team between the client and the vendor to make sure that we're managing those operations effectively, that we're addressing issues effectively, and driving towards the critical elements that define success. These are the kind of things that need to be tracked, they need to be managed, and they need to be transparent to everybody on the contract. So this is an example of a real-life example of a scorecard that we use with one of our larger contracts. We develop these in conjunction with our clients to make sure that the measures of success are the things that are pertinent to them. We have along here deliverables that include specific projects that we're working on. In this one, for example, the client was looking to us to help make their operations more efficient. What we did was we deployed a Lean Six Sigma trained black belt from our biologics testings operations to the client site, helped redefine how work was being done, and was able to help reduce headcount. If you think about how those types of opportunities develop, it's a key critical relationship with the client to drive those kind of things to success. It requires change on both parties' part, and scorecard measures that are transparent are absolutely critical to those successes. Probably the most important thing on this page is that last row on the bottom, which is a subjective measurement of the quality of the relationship. All of these things, you hit bumps in the road, is the quality of the relationship where it needs to be, and you're driving it forward in the right way you need. So just an example of how these things need to be measured, and the kind of things that you should be looking to your provider to be able to provide to you to show the value. This is going to take a little bit of a different spin on a pure insourced model, which is fairly simple, where we would bring staff into your facility to operate within your four walls. This case study, real life case study that we're working through right now, involves a major 10 pharma company who essentially have run out of space, need to partner with a group to help not only provide that space, but provide the technical expertise. So we worked with this client to define some space that we're actually now building within one of Charles River's facilities. We've transferred some employees from the client facility to our facility to make sure that they have that quality control, if you will, to their standard within the operation. We're bringing people in to run under that joint mandate, and provided a solution to the client, which is a little bit unique. So not only leveraging the staff that we have, but also leveraging the facilities that we have to reduce the costs on the part of the client. They don't actually have to build that physical infrastructure. These are the kind of things that we're doing across many of our different business lines now. Looking at how we can provide not only staffing, but facility support as well. So what the client ended up with here was a much more flexible workforce than they needed. We've actually partnered with them to be able to transfer some of the work between the facility that we'll be running this work at and other Charles River facilities. And what that does is it reduces the FTE base that we need. So if you think about staffing as a sine wave, where would you normally staff? You would normally staff to somewhere towards the top of that to make sure that with overtime you can hit your peak demands. With this kind of a model, we're able to pull that down, reduce the FTE headcount, and hit those surges by moving things out to a Charles River facility. So that's what we're calling a right sourcing model. It's a combination of insourcing and outsourcing, maybe an evolution of the insourcing model that provides a great degree of value at a lower cost and great value to Charles River as well. So this one, we're working through this one right now, and it's I think really going to be a model for how we can take things forward. So why would you insource? Flexibility, critical element to all of this. We can move, in-source providers can move much more quickly often than our clients can. We can surge and flex that capacity as needed. So if there's uncertainty around, are you going to need permanent staff for this, we can bring people in on a shorter term basis to help meet peak needs. There's depth if you pick the right provider in terms of accessing the technical expertise within the client's facility. We run many of these types of facilities around the world ourselves, so when you run into assay development problems or what have you, we have a great wealth of expertise that can help access, or can help, I should say, you can access to help address those challenges. There's a critical component of this is the administrative element, the human resource element working with this. There's a lot of law around how you do this, keep yourself out of problems. And there's a very definite skill set in terms of bringing people in quickly and moving through these kind of models. So depth of experience with the administrative elements of this is critical. Training, absolutely critical to making sure that the staff that are there are proficient in what's in the assays they're going to be conducting. We've deployed over 100 different training programs to clients at various facilities here to great positive response. And then, example being quality assurance. Obviously, we run these types of things in our own facilities. So, again, reach back into the organization should there be quality needs or challenges, or even advice from a different perspective from a vendor who has done a lot of this themselves. It allows you to leverage the investment in existing infrastructure. So oftentimes when there are headcount challenges, you may not be able to hire. You may have some of the physical infrastructure. Why pay an outsource? Why pay somebody to do that in an outsourced fashion? You're paying for your own space, your own equipment that you have there. By contracting it out to somebody outside, you're paying for their physical infrastructure. You're paying for their facility depreciation, for their equipment. So it's a way to leverage the investments you may already have. It allows the company to focus on the core science. Offloading a lot of the administrative elements of this is something that we see a lot of very big companies saying, wait a minute, we don't want to be burdened with this kind of operation. We want to be really focusing just on what it takes to get new medicines to market. And a lot of these elements we're considering non-core, and we can do it cheaper with somebody else, and that's what we're going to do. So it's something that's really on the rise. Greater control over intellectual property. It's happening within your own facilities. It's not something which is having to be transferred out. And cost savings, a huge element of that. So I mentioned this before, but the perfect situation is that your third-party provider can not only do this work within your facilities, but that they can provide an overflow capacity at their own facilities for assays which are appropriate to do this with, and meet those surge demands in a combination of an in-source, outsource fashion. That's something we call a right sourcing model. So that is a very, very quick overview. The clock here tells me I'm at 18 minutes and 50 seconds of a 20-minute presentation. So I'm going to wind it up at that and ask if there are any questions.
Greg, I have a quick question. In other industries, there have been some pretty well-documented legal problems concerning insourcing.
Yep.
Do you have any, could you kind of expand upon what companies in the biotech market should look for?
Yeah, so there were some very highly publicized lawsuits in California where people were bringing contractors onto site and basically doing it in a way that allowed them to have second-class citizens on site. So people that they didn't pay, didn't reward the same way, treated very differently. There's laws around that called co-employment. They're absolutely critical to make sure that those are navigated properly, or you can set yourself up for some very, very large fines. Microsoft got quite a large fine for that a number of years ago. So if you're looking at an insourced relationship, you need to make sure that the provider that you have is very familiar with that and can show you a documented history of how they navigate that. And that's very important around the structures that you set up and control on that. So critical element in the kind of a number one differentiator, if you will, in terms of how a staffing company might do that versus how you might work with a truly an insourced provider, particularly in highly technical areas.
So can you expand upon CRL's specific capabilities as it pertains to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I said some of this before, but the fact that Charles River is one of the world's largest insourcing companies, 800 employees, contract employees who are Charles River employees, 70 different contracts around. We got 2 in China, but mostly in the U.S. and Europe. Critical to that. So experience across a broad geography. A lot of big pharma companies are looking at doing things in a broad way that cross boundaries. So you want to be able to operate across multiple jurisdictions. The other critical element to that is that the insource provider does this work themselves. So you've got reach back then into the company to say, I've just hit some kind of a technical snag here. We work with virtually every company out there. I think Charles River worked on almost 60% of the new drugs that went to market last year. And a lot of those, we've hit a lot of those same kind of problems in our own laboratories. We can advise on a lot of strategies to help resolve problems. And by working with an insource provider like Charles River, you have access to all of those types of technical expertise that you wouldn't with many. Okay. 21 minutes, 40 seconds. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time. Appreciate it.